You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
The Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Laurel Tague.
Too much to learn, you say. Cover up is fine, that's your plan, not mine. I'm ready to be told. Secrets to unfold. It's our time to come of age. Time for truth to turn the page. We wanna be inside the dark. We live within a question mark. Are they a friend or foe? Tell me now. We need to know. Need to know.
Welcome, everybody, to Epic Voyages Radio here on Inception Radio Network. We have a terrific pair with us tonight. My guests are Rob and Trish Macgregor. They were with me a couple of months ago talking about synchronicity, and we just didn't have enough time to talk about this second book, and I wanted to, so that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to be talking about aliens in the backyard. And it's a very auspicious time to be talking about aliens and UFOs and abductions, too. Let me get a few little bits of information out there for you as resources. First of all, our shows are always archived on Inception Radio Network. We also archive them on our YouTube channel for Epic Voyagers. Our shows are also rebroadcast on Friday nights every week on Dark Matter Radio Network. And they are rebroadcast at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific there at Dark Matter. We have a website that finally we are working on and renovating it, epicvoyagers.com. We're adding a blog, hoping to have some of our Epic team members to write articles and points of view for that. And we also have Facebook, we have Instagram and Twitter. We have links to those on our homepage there at the website, epicvoyagers.com. And let's see. Be sure if you want to ask questions in this first hour, and of course during the second hour, you could go to the chat room at Inception Radio Network and type them right into the chat room. Also, I'm going to be putting up some images and links to websites for the Macgregors there, if you want those. And then one quick special announcement, and we're going to get underway here. I wanted to tell everyone that our Epic Voyagers founder and president, Ken Cherry, has a brand new book that's available at our website, epicvoyagers.com. And these are going to be autographed copies, and the cost includes everything, tax, shipping and handling, and the autograph. Mark Slade Investigates the Stephenville UFO. This book is based on Ken's first-hand experiences during the famous January 2008 UFO sightings in Stephenville and Central Texas, and all the subsequent events that followed that, including the multiple sightings that continued on throughout the entire year of 2008. The research they did, the investigations, everything. Ken's going to be here with me to interview in about 2 weeks to talk about his book and that time in his life and the experiences. So be sure that you mark your calendars and don't forget to come back and listen to that interview. It's going to be pretty interesting. So with that, remember that we're talking about Aliens in the Backyard tonight, the book written by Rob and Trish Macgregor. I'm sure you already know who Rob and Trish are. They are prolific authors with a recent focus on synchronicity, alien abductions, contacts from the other side, and maybe other dimensions. And this book kind of focuses on alien abductions and the experiences of first-hand abductees. It's pretty interesting. I know you can get the book from Amazon.com. I know they also have links at their website, which is synchrosecrets.com, synchroSecrets.com. And I want to make sure that you know that their blog will be talking tonight at one point about planetary empaths, which I find very interesting. These are people who have physical symptoms of all kinds when some terrible disaster is either about to happen to the planet or is happening. They include things like the 9/11 plane crashes, the earthquake that happened in Japan, the tsunami over in Indonesia, all kinds of things. And that's part of their book that we're going to talk about tonight. But they have stories that are in their blog from these people, these empaths who have these experiences, and it's just a fascinating read. It's the link for that is blog.synchrosecrets.com. I'm going to put those up in the chat room so everybody can just link directly to them, and I'll give those out again a couple of times tonight. Again, real quickly, let me just tell you some of the things that Rob and Trish, I don't know when you find time to do anything at all with the number of books that you've written. Rob himself is the author of 19 novels, 14 nonfiction books, and he's also teamed up with George Lucas and Peter Benchley to work on movies and TV series. He also writes both adult and young adult mysteries, adventures, science fiction, and fantasy, and that includes his original Indiana Jones novels. Trish is the author of 35 novels, mystery, suspense, thrillers, science fiction. They both have won the coveted Edgar Allan Poe Award for mystery writing. No small accolade for that. And together they've written several self-help books on dreams, synchronicity, yoga, psychic development, astrology, the tarot, dreams and dream interpretation, aliens and abductions, and the Bermuda Triangle. So tonight we're going to be talking about alien experiences and abductions. And with that, I want to introduce Rob and Trish. How are you guys doing down in Florida?
We're doing good.
Very good.
Wonderful.
It's hot.
Hot and sticky, I bet.
It
Definitely.
Your book was so interesting. It seems like you focused, you mentioned more than 5 people, but you really focused on a man and his wife leading just a normal life, and then suddenly they have this abduction experience, and it took them months and maybe even years to come to grips with it and accept it and decide where they are going to put it in their personal history as they look back over their lives. You had one woman who was in a car with her son that had an experience while they were driving. And then you had 2 more women. But then, as I said, your book had focused on a lot of other anecdotal, I guess, comments from your empaths. I mean, not the empaths blog, but your Synchro Secrets blog. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. Well, I want to give listeners a couple of stunning statistics. I had not seen these research and marketing research polls that you mention in your book. In 2003, there was a Roper poll. Roper is a marketing research group. They found out that more than 33 million Americans claim to be abductees themselves. And in 2012, National Geographic commissioned a nationwide survey through Kelton Research. They actually questioned a little over 1,100 Americans over the age of 18. And what they found, I think, is pretty remarkable. Over a third of them, 36%, believe that UFOs exist. 4 out of 5 of them think that the U.S. government is hiding information about UFOs and ETs. 77%, that's almost 4 out of 5, believe that there are signs here that ETs have visited the planet. 1 in 10 think that they personally witnessed a UFO event. And over half of them, about 55%, believe that men in black are threatening people and witnesses and clamping down on any attempt to disclose the truth. Then again, the MSNBC had a poll. It's less scientific and it's a smaller poll, but in 2007, they found that 63% answering their poll believe that UFO sightings are actually visits from ET. Those are some pretty amazing numbers, and I'm a statistician, so I understand that estimates are as good as the work that went into setting up the design. But what do these data say to you two about the topic of your book?
Well, one thing it says is that it's a lot more common than we think. Mm-hmm. You know, and even though a lot of abductees are afraid to come forward, they're afraid they'll lose their jobs, or maybe their spouse or partner doesn't know they've been abducted. You know, they're afraid of ridicule.
There's also a growing conflict in consensus reality about these matters. And government, academia, and the mainstream media, the approach to UFO and alien encounters is to treat them either humorously or dismissively. But there's something going on. For example, when President Obama, in his either near the end of his first term or early in the second term, opened an executive website to anybody who could ask questions, and they were bombarded by UFO-related questions so much that they had to move them to a separate website. And you know, then they just gave like one general answer for all of them. But it was just fascinating that it was like over 60% of them questions were about UFOs.
Wow, I got tickled as you were saying that, because I'm thinking of the automated voice when you dial some number and it says, for English, press 1, only this time it would say, for UFO reports or questions, press 5. That's amazing. Well, you know, I've been doing a lot of reading lately about some of the claims about suppression of information, and you're exactly right. Traditional scientists, for the most part, try to make fun of people, or they just dismiss them out of hand and won't even discuss it. I remember reading about a study where a woman, I think you mentioned it in your book, I've got it in my notes here, a woman did such a terrible research study, and she was at Harvard.
Oh, she was a skeptic.
Yeah, say
Right.
something about that. What a put down, and her research was terrible.
I vaguely remember this. It was when John Mack was still alive, and he was either had just written his book or was doing his research on on abductees. And apparently this woman was also at Harvard, and she was skeptical and thought he was basically foolish. Big mistake. And so she wrote, it was either a paper or a book.
Yeah, it was a book.
It was a book. Right. And her research was just shoddy, and it was wrong. And Mac, I guess his reaction to this whole thing was like, huh? Here he was practically persecuted by Harvard for even looking into this stuff. Mm-hmm. They pretty much threatened to end his tenure. And I guess he fought back and he won. He got to continue his research.
Well, go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
Well, she began with the premise that well, what she was doing was interviewing people who had alien abduction experiences. But in her book, she says right off the bat, she's starting with the premise that none of these people really had abduction experiences because there are no aliens. There are no UFOs here.
Right. No such thing as a UFO. So that's obviously not what's going on here. Let's talk about something else.
Therefore, you're depressed and deluded.
Yeah, and I remember Stan
molested. You know, that's a big
right. And Stan Friedman came out. You had a comment, I think, in the book where he pointed out he was horrified that someone at Harvard didn't take a look at it before it went to publication because it's just embarrassing. I mean, research is not defined by starting out with a prejudice or a bias and then writing to make sure everybody understands that you were correct. I mean, that's just not research. Well, that was well. In addition to those kinds of treatments, they tend to blame people for having hypnotic implanted suggestions or memories, or it was a memory of something that happened to them as a child, and they're choosing to remember it as aliens because the truth is too horrifying to them. I don't know. Being abducted by an alien sounds pretty horrifying to me.
Well, I mean, the point is they always start from the place of you're lying or you're deluded. Mm-hmm. You know, there's nothing about, well, let's look into this. And that's what Mac did that was different. Mm-hmm. You know, he actually started regressing abductees.
I don't remember that I saw it in your book, but you two might have a kind of a ballpark figure for this. Do you have any idea how many actual abductees have been questioned or interviewed by legitimate researchers by this point?
No idea at all. There are a lot of different groups. Like there's a group called experiencers who look at these experiences as the glass is half full, you know, like it was really, really positive. It changed everything. Mm-hmm. And they do their own interviews. But, you know, there's a lot of different organizations that do this.
But I would say, I think we can accurately say that it's a tiny, tiny minority have been interviewed and have had hypnotic regressions. Most people who have these experiences don't want to publicize them. They don't want to be ridiculed. And that's what the case of the couple that you mentioned and that wrote about, that was the man's point of view. He didn't have anyone to talk to, but he had this experience, and he just had a personal crisis, basically a breakdown that he went through. And his wife just said she had a whole different perspective. She said, we experienced something that most people will never experience. We should just accept that as something that is wonderful, almost, that happened to us, and just let it go. But he couldn't let it go because his whole world had changed. He didn't believe in UFOs. He thought it was something that from Hollywood, and that if he's Canadian from near the Montreal area, and he felt that if there was a such thing as aliens and UFOs, that the U.S. military would have told us about it long ago, and which is kind of
naive
point of view.
Yeah, no kidding.
But because he works in he's afraid of losing his job, which is why we had to use a pseudonym for him. But with Connie Cannon, the woman who was abducted with her son, she's at an age where she said she just doesn't care who knows, so she let us use her complete name and her history and everything.
Has she said much about her son's reaction at this point as he gets older with that experience? Because he was awake, sitting there with it.
Yeah, I mean, he still has experiences. She sent us photos of UFOs that he's taken. One of them we had sent to Whitley Strieber, and as a result, we all went on to his radio show to talk about this particular photo. But yeah, he still has experiences.
And how old is he now?
I think he's in his 30s.
30s, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, their experience happened in 1981, quite a while back. And it was
Go ahead. It's on an Air Force base or something like that?
Yeah, well, they were moving from southern Georgia to St. Augustine, and she and her youngest son were in a car behind the husband and the other two sons who were in the moving van. And they were driving I-75, and it was night. Now, I-75 at night is dark. And it's a little unnerving, especially if you're, a mother with a kid. But suddenly, she found that they weren't on I-75 anymore. And she couldn't figure out what had happened because she hadn't taken an exit. And then all of a sudden, they find themselves on an Air Force base. And she and her son are on the ground, kneeling in front of these militia guys with assault rifles.
Jeez.
Who also had ETs with them, Grays.
Oh my gosh.
Overhead, you've got choppers that are whirling around and a ship. And they were being threatened. And one of the military guys said, "If you ever," and then she didn't know what else he said. She was so panicked, as you can imagine.
It seems like it's pretty hard for a woman with her little boy driving down a road to get onto a military installation and get to that point without somebody helping them get there.
Exactly. And when they left, they didn't know how to get off the base, and they stopped at
what Connie described as a convenience store.
As a convenience store, but military bases don't have convenience stores, so there's some questions about what she was actually experiencing. They have commissaries, but not convenience stores. But she was told that, well, the only way to get off the base is the same way you came on. And she said she had no idea how she got on the base, but eventually she was able to get back onto the interstate. But it's a fascinating story because there's just so many different levels to it of what was going on. And she ended up arriving at the house about more than 2 hours.
Oh, it's more than like 5 or 6 hours.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Long after she was supposed to be.
And her husband and the other two boys had just gone on ahead because this was in the days before cell phones. They thought maybe they'd stop for a bite to eat or something.
And they must have been absolutely going crazy after 2 hours.
Yeah.
Well, that would be the first interstate highway that I know of that runs right through a military installation, I'll tell you.
Well, actually, it was the installation was Warner Robins, and it's about 12 to 15 miles off I-75. So
that makes it even harder.
Yeah.
Well, and this is not just stuff that's been happening since 1947. There's a lot of documents, books, ancient texts, paintings, all kinds of things that show that some kind of sightings of what could only be called UFOs have been happening for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right?
Well, that's what Ancient Aliens is about, the TV show, basically.
Right, and there's the pictures of the Vimanas that are in some of the ancient Hindu paintings and things from the Middle Ages, and that's not even counting the writing, it's just the visual arts. But you bring up a point in the book where you're saying, well, why are they here? Are they here to help us? Are they just observing and collecting data and they're just going to watch, but they're going to be separate observers, or are they here to take advantage or at worst set up the end of our species? There's really not a firm answer to that, is there?
No, you get a million different answers. I mean, there's some people who believe that they're here to help us evolve. There's some people who believe that they're evil. And then there's other people who believe that, it's an expedition.
And probably the answer is all of the above.
Yeah, it could be. Because, I mean, if the different species are coming from different cultures and planets with different plans in mind, it could be some of all that.
Well, it could also be different dimensions. So, I don't think anybody really knows.
But there's one theory that there is like a cosmic war going on between some of these groups that are aligned with each other, and that planet Earth is part of it, but we don't know exactly, what's going on. It's like a war at a higher level of consciousness than we're aware of, where there's probably not weapons like we have with guns and bullets and bombs, but a different sort of war altogether.
And some of these abductees who've had sperm and ovum taken from them believe that there's an actual breeding program. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, that's another whole facet to this thing.
Yeah, I've read a couple of different writers' opinions that maybe some of these civilizations just can't breed themselves successfully anymore, and they're dying out. So they're trying to kickstart their own civilizations again by borrowing DNA. I can understand that.
Well, some of the women who've experienced this, we write about this one woman in the book, Diane Fine. Mm-hmm. After her experience, maybe 5 or 6 years later, she had another experience where she found herself on a craft, and they showed her a child, a real sickly infant. And this also happened to Connie, where they were actually shown, this is your baby. Mm-hmm. With Diane, though, it's really interesting. When she was in high school, she was diagnosed with cystic ovary disease. Mm-hmm. And was told she would never be able to have kids. She'd had 3 surgeries by the time she was in her late teens. And yet, while living in a college town upstate New York, she began to manifest symptoms of a pregnancy. So she went to her family doctor, and he said, "You're pregnant." And she was shocked, and so was the doctor, because it wasn't supposed to happen. And in those days, there was nothing in upstate New York to handle what the doctor considered was a high-risk pregnancy. So he sent her to a clinic in Burlington, Vermont. So she and her, it's like a 3-hour trip from where she lived by car. Mm-hmm. So she and 2 roommates left one morning, and this gets strange. As they went through the town of Denimora, a really thick fog, right after they went through Denimora, a really thick fog moved in. And the driver couldn't see, so they suggested, well, let's pull off the road and wait till the fog passes. So they found this driveway, pulled up to a barn that had been converted into what looked like, like a soda fountain or an old restaurant. And they were waited on by what she described as an elderly couple, small, short. And they ordered soda pop. And Diane said after that first sip of that drink, that was the last thing she remembered until she and her roommates were at the ferry dock ready to cross Lake Champlain.
Wow.
And that the drink was something very sweet and nothing like they'd ever tasted before. And then they just didn't have any memory of what happened after that.
And it was also late afternoon. And they had left early morning, and by the time they reached the ferry station, it was late afternoon, so obviously there was some missing time here. So then she gets to the clinic, and she's examined, and the nurse calls in somebody else, and they confer for a few minutes, and then they tell Diane, "You're not pregnant." And yet they had the urine test, the blood test, everything that said she had been pregnant. And it wasn't until a few years later that she started reading about abductions and missing pregnancies, and she figured out what had happened to her. But she was so upset by the time she left there, they had to give her a Valium because she knew something had happened. She just didn't know what.
Wow.
Then the kicker to it is, as they were coming back the same way, driving back after they got off the ferry, coming towards Denimora, they found that roadway where they had gone, and they drove in there, and there was no restaurant there, no barn at all, nothing.
Oh, my goodness. Sounds a little bit like
Screen
one of my favorite movies, the one that happens in Scotland, where Brigadoon, where there's a terrible fog and the town only appears once every 100 years.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Only this is scary. That's kind of a charming movie, but
Yeah, this is not charming.
We got a question. Let me remind everybody that we're listening to Rob and Trish Macgregor talk about their book, Aliens in the Backyard, and I've posted the image there of the book cover in the chat room a couple of times. And if you go to InceptionRadioNetwork.com and go to chat room, you can jump in there and send me questions like Carol just did, one for Rob and Trish. And I think this is a pretty interesting question. If you were invited to go off-world by aliens, both of you, what would you do?
You mean what we say?
Well, you're going to tell me what you would say might be different from what you would do.
I'd probably run home screaming.
Well,
I wouldn't want to go without my dog.
No, me either.
the interesting thing is that doesn't seem to happen. What happens is that you are just taken. I mean, I can't think of any examples where somebody was just approached and said, would you like to go on this ship now and take a cruise to another planet? I've never heard that. But these things have happened, but it's all under less...
Against your will.
Against your will, and less than comfortable scenarios.
Yeah, I think the smiling fella in Close Encounters who willingly just was skipping gaily onto the mothership with all the other astronauts is the only time I've seen someone look like they were really willing to go.
Yeah.
Right, and that movie too with all the old folks from the old folks.
Oh, Cocoon.
Cocoon, right?
Oh God.
Yeah. They all went willingly.
Yeah. Now you're reminding me of Soylent Green, and we're not going to go there.
Yeah, right.
Well, let's go back to the very beginning, and I know two stories in your book that I thought were really interesting. So my question is, how did you get involved in this particular line of inquiry, and when did you start? And I'm going to ask you, if you would, to talk about your Ouija board story, because I thought it was really interesting.
Okay.
Our admission.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we've both been fascinated by UFOs since childhood, and we both had some experiences when we were young, one or two experiences. I clearly remember being 8 or 9 years old and standing out in the dark on the intersection near where I lived, and it's something that I would never do. I was young, and my mother would always, by sundown or so, we would, unless I was with some parents were outside or with other kids, I wouldn't be out there I was out there totally by myself, and standing in the intersection, looking up and seeing these lights. I still can picture these lights: green, red, blue, and they're moving in circles and making strange movements through the sky. And I'm just standing there. And then I go in, and my mother strangely says, we just decided we would let you stand out there and see how long you would be out by yourself tonight, which was unusual for her to say something like that. And then the next day, I told the story of what I saw, and my father the next day told me that he had heard on the radio that other people had reported seeing these same lights in the sky.
Wow.
So that was my first experience that was very clear. And you had something in college.
No, I had something. I was born and raised overseas, and by the time I finished 9th grade, there were no other schools to go to. So I got shipped off to a boarding school in Massachusetts. And one night after lights out, we were in this other girl's room. There were about 7 or 8 of us. And, I'm talking and doing whatever girls that age do, being bad. And through the window, I saw what I knew was a UFO. I mean, first it was stationary. Then it kind of meandered back and forth. And then I called the other girl's attention to it. And we must have watched this thing for, 5 or 10 minutes. And then it shot off like at the speed of light. I thought, wow, that's a UFO.
Yeah.
And we've had some experiences since with sightings.
But the Ouija board story, that was something very near the time where we met, shortly after we met. in the early 1980s, 1981. And I just said to Trish, why don't we get a Ouija board and see what happens? So we went out to a hobby type store, found one, bought it, and so I started messing around with it. At first, it was very slow moving, and then suddenly it seemed to pick up and started spelling words,
making sense,
answering questions, and what we were told is that we were in communication with somebody on a craft.
So we asked for proof.
Yeah. So I was working as a newspaper reporter, and I knew from my just from my reading that Ouija boards are you may get some interesting information, but they're not very trustworthy as far as factual information. And so
you said that very nicely. I think I know what you had in mind to say, but that was very gracious of you to put it that way.
Right, yeah. So we asked for proof, and we were told.
Well, first the lights went off.
Yeah,
remember that? The lights blinked on and off several times. We thought, oh, okay, something weird's happening here.
That was strange. And then we were told to go to the airport and watch the sky. So we were at Trish's apartment she lived in Fort Lauderdale. I lived in Hollywood, Florida, about 10 miles away. And so we went to the Fort Lauderdale airport, which at that time was pretty small. You could drive up to the fence and just park on the outside of the fence and sit back and watch the airplanes taking off and landing. And so this was about 1 o'clock. The airport was pretty quiet, 1 o'clock in the morning. And we were out there for about an hour or so just watching the sky, and nothing happened. I thought, well, that figures. So we headed home, and I had to be up early in the morning to be to work at the newspaper. And as soon as I got there, I got assigned to go to a school board meeting, and I had to sit through a school board meeting, and
Rob.
Yeah, and I had to call in a story about 10:30 for the first deadline, and then I had to rush back and expand the story for the second deadline. So I was in the office typing away, and there was another reporter at the next desk, and she was typing away, and we both finished our stories about the same time. And I turned to her and I asked, "What were you writing about?" She said, "A UFO was sighted last night by the cops over Perry Airport." I said, "Perry Airport? That's in Hollywood, near where I lived."
Oh my!
Wrong airport is where we went to.
Wrong airport, but. The police had seen it. It was hovering over Perry Airport. So that night we got together again and said, let's go to Perry Airport. We went there, drove up there, completely dark. They're a very small airport, private airport. And again, we spent about an hour there staring up, nothing again. So then we're in separate cars, and we're heading out, and we get down to a red light, and I play around with the radio, and suddenly I start getting something unusual, like an old drama, like from the 1940s before television, and some late night drama that had, and I listened to it, and amazingly, one of the characters is an alien. And I couldn't believe it. After 2 nights of this and short on sleep, and then I'm listening to this radio drama of an alien talking to me.
That's amazing. And if you had only gone to the other airport instead.
Yeah, who knows?
That's amazing. That's amazing. Some of the things you write about in your book has, and I'm going to say that this has an overlap with sightings of ghost ships and things like that. And a lot of this book also overlaps with the other book we talked about a couple of months ago, Synchronicity. Both of them are excellent books, and you've got a couple of more out since then that relate to the same topic. So everybody, highly recommend it. Go to Amazon.com, and it's on Kindle too, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so, but I was fascinated. One of the very first things in this book that you talk about is a trip you took all the way to, I believe, the south tip of South America, and you heard that there was a ghost ship down there, and you actually sort of went looking for it.
It was our honeymoon.
Not everybody does that for their honeymoon.
No, I know. Well, this Chilean airline had really inexpensive tickets, and you got to stop in Ecuador and in Chile. So we flew to Chile first, and on the plane, we were sitting next to a Chilean woman, and I asked her, I said, well, where could we go in Chile where there's myth and superstition, and weird stuff? And she says, legends. She goes, Caleuche. Never heard of this place. No, it's a little island.
Chiloé.
Oh, Chiloé, that's right. Caleuche was the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then she told me about the ghost ship, the Caleuche, and how people in Chiloé believe in mermaids. I mean, so I said, that's where we're going.
Wow.
So that's where we ended up.
Yeah. And the situation, how we look at it with the Caleuche is that...
well, tell them what the Caleuche is a ghost ship that several times a year appears in this one port on the island.
It's not really a port. It's just a shallow area.
Yeah, it's a shallow
where
area.
A ship of that size could not enter.
Right.
Did that ship ever really exist?
No, there's no record of it.
Okay. So it's a ghost ship of a ghost ship.
Right.
Okay.
In fact, the word Caleuche comes from a Native American language called, it's hard to pronounce, Mapudungun, Mapudungun. And it's a combination of two words from the language, Caleutun, which is Caleutn, which means transform or change states, and Che, CHE, means people. So it's like transformation, transforming states. And so it goes far beyond just sightings of this ghost ship. There are actually abductions, and that's what we found fascinating, the similarities to alien abductions. And we found...
They also have their own Men in Black.
Yeah. So,
oh, yeah, I remember that now. Right.
On the ghost ship.
Right, they come ashore. And there's one story of a man who disappeared for 50 years and was found by his brother sitting in their abandoned childhood home wearing the same clothes he had been wearing when he disappeared. And when they asked him where he'd been, he said, on a boat, and not to ask him any more questions.
Oh, my goodness.
And there's another man named Juan Antonio Fernandez who was 16 when he left home at dawn one day to go fishing, and he said he was abducted by the crew of the Caleuche. He recalled that he was missing for 2 days, and he recalled that what happened is when he arrived at a small hill that overlooked the beach, he heard a strange humming noise like motors. And then when he was found by his family 2 days later, just wandering aimlessly around, he had this terrible scar on his chest, shaped like a gigantic hand with long, narrow fingers. Ugh. And these stories we learned were from a book by a Chilean author, Antonio Tabis. And
but we also asked people who lived there. We found this fisherman who was on the beach and started asking him questions. And he was kind of funny in the way that he was a fisherman who said that the legend, for instance, about the mermaids was that if the fish were running, the mermaid would be facing shore, so the fisherman would know it. And if the fish weren't running, she'd be facing the ocean, and they would know not to go out. And then he sort of laughed. He goes, but that's a legend that my grandfather told me. And yet you walk into restaurants and you see, ashtrays that shaped like mermaids. You see little icons of ghost ships. So I mean, it's definitely part of the urban lore.
But it's not.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, it's not something unique. In centuries past, there's been mythical creatures such as fairies and the jinn in Arab lands that were said to abduct people. So it's not the only case of that happening, but I look at it as like a screen memory that's been implanted, that the people of this island could accept the sense of a ghost ship,
but not aliens in a UFO,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or several hundred years ago, they could accept the idea of a fairy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, an alien would be inconceivable. But it's interesting to think that maybe those stories that are so similar are relating to the same perpetrators. It's just that they've been given different labels. And that was almost my very next question is, can you explain what screen memories are?
Yeah, the interesting thing about screen memories is the question, does the human mind create these changed memories? For example, instead of seeing small gray creatures, seeing owls or deer, or are they something that the aliens themselves have some effect over on our minds? Because they do seem to have a connection
with human consciousness.
With human consciousness, yeah. I think that's a key part. They are able to communicate telepathically with us, and it seems that they could even possibly stimulate synchronicities, because there's a lot of synchronicities that are related to UFO experiences that take place during and afterwards. And there's one particular experience I'm thinking about, a story by that Deborah Fine told us, when she's been an abductee
since she was a little kid.
Yeah, since childhood, and so she has many experiences. One of them came after she went to a rock concert. And what happened is that afterwards they were coming home and she was abducted, and she ended up in a ship and surrounded by these grays. There were actually three of them, but one of them was not a gray. Instead, it was the lead singer from the band that she had just seen, and she points to him and is suddenly very angry and says, "What is he doing here?" And when they realized that she was upset, the image just shifted from the band leader back into to a gray, and they said, "We thought you liked him."
Oh my goodness! The other story that I found really interesting in your book, and it was, I think, the other woman, I'm not sure, but Carol, and I want to say she was there with her son on a ship, and they were running around trying to get out of there, and the aliens were trying to catch them, but they were too slow, and she wound up in like a command center, and lo and behold, sitting strapped in like the commander's chair is some Air Force guy that she actually knew in real life. And he said, "Don't worry, as long as I'm here, nothing will happen to you."
Yeah, that was funny.
And after the whole thing was over and they were back, in their real life, whatever, I don't remember if she got a hold of him or they ran into each other, and he had the same memory that she had of being on that ship and seeing her.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think they ever actually met. I think this was through email or
calling something.
Right.
That was absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, Connie has pretty good recall of all these experiences of hers, but even she isn't sure what's real and what was screen.
Mm-hmm. Well, there seems to be so much similarity and commonality with seeing owls, or just the face of the grays. I mean, that's become a trademark. Anything that even kind of looks like that, you automatically think, "Oh, E.T., alien."
Yeah, right.
That would almost sort of suggest to me that it is being planted because it's so standardized.
Well, I think, Whitley Strieber really popularized that image in 1987 with his book Communion, because that's what was on the cover. And ever since then, I mean, that's the standard gray face.
But there are a number of people we've talked to who have as soon as they saw that book, they recognized that face, and they were startled to see it on the cover of a book. And I think Connie was one of them. She could never read that book. She bought it, started it, and just had to close it because it upset her so much. Just the memories coming back of her own experiences.
So obviously, a lot of people have very negative reactions to these experiences. Would you say that's pretty common?
For people who've
been abducted.
Who've been abducted by grays, yes. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody being abducted by anything but a gray. Have you?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't. Possibly by the lizard.
The reptilian.
The reptilian, yeah. But yeah, most of them have that type of reaction. But then there are these people who call themselves the experiencers, who have a different point of view, that they see it as a positive experience, and they actually look forward to these experiences, even though they're very traumatic. And we know one woman in Sarasota, Florida, who has repeated experiences with interdimensional beings, and we've written some about her in our last book. And she finds the experiences startling, but she's so used to it because they've been going on, I think, for 19 or 20 years now, and that she accepts it and is...
And actually sets aside time each day to work with the energies, as she calls it.
Wow, that's very trusting.
Yeah.
Well, also, she's a retired veterinarian. And as she puts it, who's better equipped to study another species than a vet?
I wouldn't have thought about that, but you're right. That does kind of make sense. Well, people also have dreams about UFOs, and they'll have the same dreams. And I don't know if this is always necessarily people who know each other and they're going to see each other over coffee or whatever, but how would you explain, say, three people who have almost the exact same details of a dream on the same evening about involving a UFO or ET, and then they get together and bring it up, and the other two say, "Oh, I had that same dream last night." How do you explain that?
Maybe they were all on a ship.
Yeah.
One of the most common explanation for dreams is that we're regurgitating the day's events or recent events in our lives, and if these people all had been in an abduction experience, that would make sense. Or it could be something precognitive as well, a premonition of something that was coming to them.
Also, Jung, in 1953, Carl Jung wrote a book about what he called flying saucers. And he saw dreams, for instance, and sightings of quote-unquote flying saucers as symbolic of man's need for wholeness, especially the circular ones.
Yeah, and you can also interpret dreams of UFOs as puns. Is there something hovering over your life that's making you feel alienated? Or what?
That's an interesting take I'd never heard before.
Yeah.
Say that again, just so everybody hears that.
Yeah. Is there something hovering over your life making you feel alienated, or what feels alien to you in your life? So that's looking at it as a pun and a psychological experience.
Wow, that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Answer why three people would have that same dream on the same night.
Yeah, that's pretty odd. I mean, I could see it. The three people happened to be out together, and they went home, and they had the dream. Then probably it was lost time, and they were just remembering it. But strange. Why do you think UFO sightings right now seem to be proliferating? You have an opinion about that?
Because we live in tumultuous times.
Yeah, and
I
think that they're. Why would they be trying to be seen, or are we just looking harder for them, or why is it? It really does seem like every day you're hearing about someone reporting seeing something.
Well, especially now in these days when everybody's got an iPhone and camera, right, a phone. And also with the internet, information just travels much more quickly.
And it could be that, we're coming to
a paradigm shift.
A paradigm shift, or as the religious people put it, an end times, which is not necessarily what I would consider to mean to be the end of the world, so to speak, but as a shift of just of our reality. And one aspect of that shift definitely would be recognition of the existence of beings from elsewhere among us. That would definitely cause a shift in our consciousness.
That's exactly where we're going after the break, and also talking about the guy in your book, Bruce Vernon, and the story about the Bermuda Triangle. But I want to talk specifically about these predictions from the Hopi and the Lakota Sioux and the Maya and the Aztecs, and get into planetary empaths, which I think is just so fascinating. So I think we're getting close to taking a break. I'll wait until Joe, our producer, cues me on that. Just give us a little preview of, introduce who Bruce Vernon is. And from what I gather from reading your book, he may be the only pilot ever to have survived actually traveling through the Bermuda Triangle in an electronic fog. Do you think that he is?
I think that maybe other people have had similar experiences, but I'm not sure that any of them are around anymore. Charles Lindbergh had one experience on a flight that he didn't write about until he wrote about in his autobiography, but it wasn't published until after he was gone. He didn't want to admit that he could become so lost in a fog that he would be totally off track by such a great degree, and that this fog would just seemingly cling to his plane for hours. I think he was flying from Cuba to St. Louis, and he writes about that story in his autobiography.
Well, I know being in clouds and a fog in a plane would be horribly disorienting, especially if you didn't have the kind of equipment that would help you at least understand what your orientation was in the air. But the way you described the situation that Bruce was in, and he had passengers in the plane with him, right?
Right, yes. And it seemed to be this fog was an enormous fog that went on and on and on. But when they checked the radar, it was clear. I mean, and when they were able to get in contact with the Miami Tower, there was no the tower said that it was clear weather, that there was no massive fog.
In fact, we had a remote viewer view Bruce in that flight as one of his targets, so we can about that after.
Wow, yeah, I don't remember reading that.
No, that's not in this book. It's something.
Yeah, definitely. That's where we're going to start, is with Bruce and the fog, because I think I remember it was like a wall of fog that he described. So what we're doing is we're listening to Rob and Trish Macgregor talk about their book, Aliens in the Backyard, and this is Epic Voyages Radio on Inception Radio Network. And we are going to take a really short break, just a couple of minutes, and come right back and pick it up talking about going through the electronic fog in the Bermuda Triangle. And then we're going to talk about planetary empaths. And I think this is something that a lot of people, a lot of listeners haven't heard about yet. So don't go away. Stay with us.
You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
You didn't forget what's coming up tonight, did you? Hi, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Never miss that interview you were looking forward to or the show on your favorite topic. Follow IRN on Twitter, I_R_N, and get reminders about the evening's live shows as well as fun and important updates throughout the week. That's I_R_N, and never miss a great show again.
Hi, can you hear my voice? Imagine how many other people can hear it too. If you have advertising needs, then look no further. The Inception Radio Network currently has openings for on-air advertisements and radio show sponsorships. Given any thought to your target demographic? Inception has you covered there too. Advertising on a network gives you multiple opportunities to advertise on a wide variety of radio show broadcasts, and we have one to fit every advertising need. You know, in recent years, internet radio has exhibited a phenomenal listener growth. An Arbitron Edison survey shows that online radio boosts at least 33 million unique visitors each week and 54 million each month. And that number amazingly continues to grow. And these listeners are a part of many businesses' core demographics. And surveys have shown that internet radio listeners are far more likely than regular radio listeners to spend money on a whole range of activities. You know, internet listeners vote, they dine out and eat fast food, and they grab a cup of coffee. And here's the interesting one. They buy items online at a much higher rate than all other market segments combined. Internet radio also enables businesses to connect with consumers during work hours, where increasingly more lifestyle decisions are being made. Advertise with the best. The Inception Radio Network offers competitive advertising rates to fit just about anyone's advertising budget. Stop by today at www.inceptionradionetwork.com or call us toll-free at 1-888-919-2355. Get the word out. Get results with the Inception Radio Network.
Looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry, IRN's interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN Chat Lounge, Game Lounge, Video Lounge, or the Mood Lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless, so use your time wisely by keeping it all on IRN.
Howdy, this is Joe Mars. I'm inviting you to tune in to Epic Voyages, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, Monday nights, right here on Inception Radio Network. To find out more about Epic and how you can become a member, visit epicvoyagers.com. That's EPICVOYAGERS.com.
Welcome back, everybody out there, to Epic Voyages Radio here on Inception Radio Network. I want to give out the dial-in number for those of you that would like to call in and ask a question of Rob and Trish Macgregor personally. That number is 888-919-2355. And as always, you can go to our chat room online at Inception Radio Network and type your questions in the chat room. Or you can go to Skype, Inception Radio Network, no spaces, and type in a question there. We're talking about Rob and Trish's book, Aliens in the Backyard, and I'm putting some resources up in the chat room at Inception Radio Network to make it easy for you to find some of their material. Of course, you can get their book and all their books through Amazon.com. You can also go, oops, I did a misspelling. You can go to their website, synchrosecrets.com, and when I stop talking, I'll type that out. Thank you, Carol. Carol cleaned up my typing. Synchrosecrets.com. SYNCHROSECRETS.com. Synchrosecrets. And I want to take a minute before we go back to the electronic fog and the Bermuda Triangle and Bruce Vernon and mention that they have moved their blog that includes all of these stories about the dreams, the events, the occurrences, the planetary empaths, which we're going to get into here in just a few minutes. That is at blog.synchrosecrets.com. So I'll put that link up here from the other page, and feel free to go when you go to that website that I just gave you. One of the links at the bottom of their navigation bar is Planetary Empaths. Go to that link, and that is the blog. So I think you'll be very impressed with it, as I think you would be with this book if you would check it out. Trish, you want to say anything else about the blog?
Just that it's at blog.synchrosecrets.com, and it's actually the planetary empath thing is in the masthead, and it's the last entry in the blue masthead. The rest of the stuff is our books. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and it's fascinating stuff. So, okay, Rob and Trish, let's go back to Bruce Vernon, who we left in the electronic fog in the Bermuda Triangle in an airplane.
Right.
He actually, if I remember the way you described it in your book, he's describing seeing like two walls of walls made out of clouds or fog or something.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, this was 1970 when Bruce was 23 years old. He and his father were hoping to develop a resort on Andros Island in the Bahamas. And they had taken flights between West Palm and Andros a number of times, and they knew this route very well. And so on this particular day, they were leaving Andros Island, and they were just a couple miles offshore. I should pause here and mention, just on a side, Andros Island is the home of a secret Navy base that's sometimes called the Underwater Area 51. We can go back to that. But so anyhow, he was with his father and a business partner, and they were leaving Andros, a couple miles offshore. He sees this strange lenticular cloud. A lenticular cloud is kind of a UFO-shaped cloud. It was about a mile across, but lenticular clouds are usually over mountaintops, like 10,000 feet or higher. And this was just about a mile. It was maybe a thousand feet up. And so he decided to go around it. He maneuvered around it and continued on. And he looks back and sees that this cloud is expanding. It's growing arms that are coming out on either side of the plane, but wide apart, miles apart. And as he's moving along, these arms are expanding and moving with him. And then he sees another similar cloud out in front of him, and this cloud starts shooting out arms as well. And before he knows it, he's inside like a donut of this huge cloud. It was, I think, he thought it was about 15 miles across the opening. And he decided to try to go up over it. He went up to over 10,000 feet. And there was no way it seemed to continue up. He thought it might go 60,000 feet. So he went down, all the way down to just above the surface, he was just a couple hundred feet over the surface, and it seemed to be growing right out of the ocean. So he went back up, and they're starting to get nervous now, wondering how to get out of this. And they spot an opening where two of the arms are coming together, and closing. It's like an anvil, the top of an anvil coming together, and the bottom part is closing, and there's like a tunnel. So they decided to go, they could see blue sky, and so they decided to go for that tunnel. They head for it and get inside it, and it's continuing to close. And once they're inside it, the clouds are rotating counterclockwise inside this tunnel. And as they get into it, suddenly they have a sensation of being weightless. Bruce described it as if we didn't have seatbelts on, we'd been floating up near the roof of the plane. And this lasted for maybe 10, 15 seconds as they went through this tunnel. And by this time, there was none of the electronics in the plane were working.
And keep in mind, Bruce's father was also a pilot.
Right. And this was a new plane. They had the latest technology, and they had like 3 compasses, and none of them were working. They're just spinning in circles. And they make it through the tunnel, and at the end of it, the clouds were just on the tips of the wings as they come through. But when they get out on the outside, there's no blue sky. It's just like a soup. And this is when they are flying, and the fog is just continuing to be everywhere, right along with them as they're flying. And finally, they're able to contact the radio started working. They're able to contact the Miami Tower, and they told them that we must be near Bimini now. And the tower said, "There's no planes out there at all." And so his father got very upset. "What do you mean there's no planes out here?" And then there was radio silence for a while, and then the tower came back on and said, "Wait a minute, there's a plane coming over Miami Beach right now." And Bruce thought, "No, this is impossible. We couldn't be this far. That would be like teleporting 100 miles instantly." But that's what happened. I mean, suddenly they looked down, and the clouds, this massive fog vanishes, and they look back, and there's no sign of it, and they're over Miami Beach. And so it was a very startling experience for him, and it
defined the rest of Bruce's life. Actually,
he still thinks about it every day, and he taught everybody he meets. He tells them his story, and but he went for years without wanting to have anything to do with UFOs as part of the story, because he didn't want to be ridiculed and considered a nutcase. So he liked to talk about electronic fog as something coming out of the earth, and what he felt happened is that this fog surrounded the plane and actually moved along with the plane. In other words,
it glommed onto it.
Right. In other words, that fog was maybe only a quarter mile across around the plane. So that's why the radar showed that there was no massive cloud cover at all. But they experienced this fog constantly. And one of the things that made him come to believe that this was the case was there was continually a hole straight above. He could look through the windshield and look up into blue sky, and he could also look down and see the ocean. And that opening, that hole, continued right along with them all the time. And so that's how he came up with the concept of electronic fog. But now, in the last few years, he's come to accept the idea that initial lenticular cloud may have been hiding a UFO, a craft that may have come through an interdimensional portal that might be out there in what is considered the Bermuda Triangle.
So when we asked Joe McMoneagle's wife, who often acts as his monitor, he was in the government's remote viewing program, Stargate, for years. Mm-hmm. And so we asked Nancy if she would do a target based on Bruce's flight. And normally what she does, the only thing that's in the envelope is longitude and latitude.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes a few words. I think in this case she put Bruce Gernon's flight. But Joe never looks at the envelope. It's in front of him, he touches it, doesn't open it. And what Joe said about this was he was abducted.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
Well, he actually did a couple different targets, and because here's the kicker to the story is that 1 month after Bruce's experience, he went out from Miami Beach with his girlfriend at the time. She'd never been in an small airplane at night, and so he took her over Miami Beach and then went out over the ocean and to see the stars, and they were flying out, and he was coming very close to the same area where he had this experience when he sees this orange light in the distance, and he points it out, and they watch it. It's getting larger and larger and coming closer and closer until it's moving very rapidly, and he can see it as a metallic craft with a bubble on top. It's coming right at them. He tries to maneuver to escape from it, and suddenly it's gone. It just vanishes as it's about to
hit him.
about to hit the plane. And so that was one of the targets I gave to Joe. And that's the one he described. He said they were abducted. He said the whole plane was abducted. And that's why, and that's one of the reasons that Bruce has never wanted to talk about this as an abduction experience or as a UFO experience.
Right. I mean, there we are back to the beginning of the show when we were talking about people just don't want to talk about it because they know what they're in for if they say those words. Was that your kitty cat I heard in the background?
Yes, she this cat is so hungry. All she does is eat.
They're very insistent. Do I remember that, Rob, that you told me that Bruce was thinking of coming out with a book about this, or am I making that up?
No, he did.
We have a book. I co-authored it with Bruce.
Okay.
It's called The Fog.
After all of this that you've been saying about how he doesn't want to talk about it, I thought I must have just misunderstood them, because if he doesn't want to talk about it, he would never have put it in a book. But
he didn't want to talk about the UFO part.
Yeah, the UFO part. I did manage to get one chapter on the UFO question into the book, but he was very, very hesitant to talk about it. Another interesting point about Bruce's story is that when this experience happened to him, he had never heard of the Bermuda Triangle, and Charles Berlitz's book wouldn't be published for several years. But then in 1974, he saw a news program that featured Dr. Manson Valentine, who is leading a group of researchers investigating the Bermuda Triangle. And that was the first he had heard about it. And Valentine was the director of the Miami Museum of Science and had really an astonishing academic credentials, 3 PhDs from Yale in zoology, paleontology, and geology. But in spite of his academic achievements, he liked to pursue this interest that strayed far from mainstream science, interests like the Bermuda Triangle, Atlantis, and UFOs. In fact, Valentine research would play a large role in Charles Berlitz's bestseller, The Bermuda Triangle, and the sequel as well. So after watching that program, Bruce Gernon called the museum and left a message for Valentine, who contacted him a week later, and they arranged for a meeting. And they met at Valentine's house in downtown Miami, and Valentine was really fascinated by Gernon's recollection of that flight from Andros Island. And after he'd heard the entire story, Valentine turned to his wife, Anna, and said, "This is amazing. He is the only pilot to ever have flown through the heart of the storm from birth through its maturity and to exit through the vortex and survive."
Wow, that's something that, I mean, if you're going to go through something unusual, you don't want to do it up in the air in an airplane over the ocean.
That's for sure.
That's just really terrifying.
Bruce always remembers that Valentine told him that he held the key to the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, well, that's kind of a scary thought, too, especially considering he may have been abducted a couple of times.
Yeah.
What price the key?
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna shift gears just a little bit. I'm going to remind everybody we're listening to Rob and Trish Macgregor talking about their book, Aliens in the Backyard, which has an awful lot more in it than just aliens and UFOs, I might add. And the telephone number, if you'd like to dial in and talk to them and ask them a question directly, is 888-919-2355, or go to Inception Radio Network online and come to our chat room and type your question right there in the chat room. So where we're going next, this was totally new information to me about planetary empaths, and I'm going to try to introduce it very briefly by pointing out that these ancient indigenous cultures like the Hopi, the Lakota Sioux, the Maya, the Aztecs, and that's just the few that I remember that you mentioned in the book, but I know that there's dozens, maybe hundreds of more cultures that have these predictions of earth shakings, which is supposed to be the end of one age or world and the beginning of the next one. The Hopi call it the day of purification. I got a quote here: when the earth rocks to and fro, white men battle people in other lands, many columns of smoke and fire. And the Sioux mention that each of the 4 ages of rock, fire, bow, and pipe were brought to an end when humans became two-hearted, which means infected with evil. Of course, some of the original gods for these cultures, like Pahana for the Hopi, Kukulkan for the Maya, Quetzalcoatl for the Aztecs, are described as light-skinned. They're bearded. They have light-colored eyes, blue-green eyes, gray eyes. Sound very Nordic, don't sound like the Greys or the reptilians. Some of them have stories with them having come from stars like Sirius or the Pleiades, different places. So tell us what a planetary empath is, and why would this be another thing that seems to be proliferating right now?
Okay, I think it was Diane Fine who actually first brought this to our attention. During one of her abductions, she said basically the windshield, the window of the spaceship or the craft she was on, turned into kind of like a movie of planetary disruptions, pollution, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, every natural disaster that could happen. And as this movie was playing across the windows of the craft, the Gray or whoever it was who was with her said, this is a result of what humanity does to the planet. Oh. So in the early 90s, she began noticing that she had these weird symptoms, like she would get kind of weepy and sad for no reason. She'd experience vertigo. She might have a terrible ringing in her ear. And then she started associating these symptoms with events, natural disasters that would happen several days or several weeks after she'd had the symptoms. And over the years, she began piecing things together so that here's the one for March 11th, 2011 at 2:46 p.m. Tokyo time. A 9.0 earthquake shook northern Japan for 2 minutes and shifted the planet on its axis by about 9 inches. It was followed by a tsunami with 30-foot waves that swept away entire villages. Tens of thousands of people were killed and also crippled the Fukushima nuclear plant. Okay, so this was like a triple thing. About maybe 5 or 6 days before this happened, maybe a week, Diane began to have really severe physical symptoms, and she knew they were related to an upcoming disaster. She just wasn't sure what kind of disaster it was. Her ears rang constantly. She suffered from extreme vertigo, excruciating migraine. She couldn't sleep, couldn't function, and ended up in the ER several times. And a really profound sadness left her virtually paralyzed. Okay, around the same time, Connie, the other abductee who was abducted with her son, was in a grocery store one afternoon when she suddenly felt the ground shift violently beneath her and grabbed onto a shelf to keep her balance. Her head pounded, her vision blurred. She was gripped with nausea. She barely made it out of the store to her car. Her husband and the people around her didn't experience anything at all. 4 days before the triple disasters in Japan, Diane emailed us about her symptoms. She said it was getting worse. She had severe ringing in her left ear, which for her was always a precursor to a quake or a volcanic eruption. Then the other symptoms started to surface: the extreme vertigo, nausea, crippling fatigue. And she says, although I was born intuitive and empathic, nothing prepared me for how those qualities would progress through life. So by the time this Fukushima thing and the quake and tidal wave rolled around, she had a pretty good idea that whatever was coming was going to be absolutely huge. So that's, some of the other symptoms people experience are pretty awful. Bleeding from your ears, breathlessness, chest or abdominal pains, nosebleeds. And the trick with the people who experience this stuff is being able to discern what kind of disaster it is. Like I said, Diane now knows that with one particular symptom, it means there's going to be a volcanic eruption. For Connie, when it's going to be a volcanic eruption, she gets flushed and her blood pressure goes up. But it's a frustrating ability to have because you can't prevent anything and because you don't know precisely where it's going to happen. So it's not like you can warn anybody.
And for them to have had enough experience that they are developing their own map of what means what, that means they have it a lot. And to me, that's very terrifying too.
Well, I mean, basically, it's really disrupted Diane's life. I mean, and especially now, it seems like there's a natural disaster every other week.
Wow. I have experienced at times, not frequently, but that feeling of just grief is the only word I can think of that really kind of fits it. And it just comes out of nowhere for no reason. And it stops me in my tracks, and it lasts for a while, and then it's just gone. So, and that really disturbs me for them to have that and worse physical symptoms going on is just very disturbing to me.
Well, I mean, when Diane had the bleeding from her ears, she immediately went to ER. They ran all kinds of tests on her, and they said, "Well, you don't have a brain tumor," And she said, "Well, what's the bleeding from?" They said, "We don't know." Now, how frustrating is that? You have this terrible thing happening, and nobody knows what causes it.
Right.
What's the physical trigger?
Well, Rob and Trish are going to take that quick break right now, just a minute or 2 minutes, and we'll be right back after the break. Folks, get your questions down on paper if you want to ask them, because now's the time. We'll be right back with Epic Voyages Radio. Just stick around.
Listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Do you have a smartphone? If so, Inception Radio Network is the best app for you. Available on iTunes, Android, Samsung, and most other app stores. Just search Inception Radio Network. With the app, you can listen live, check out podcasts of recent and past shows, view our videos, see what shows are coming up, who the guests are, and, via the chat room, send live questions to those guests. You know it makes sense. Check your app store now. Inception Radio Network. I'll see you there.
Hello, Inception Radio Network. Would you like your favorite show to be played again live on air? Well, now the choice is in your hands with IRN's live request portal, an easy way to request your favorite show with a simple click. IRN's live request portal now gives you exclusive access to all of the shows. How easy is it? Simply type a show name or a guest name, click request, even write a dedication message, and that's it. Try it now. Simply visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com, click on the live request tab under the show menu. Now playing your favorite show is just a mouse click away.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best.
Howdy, this is Joe Mars. I'm inviting you to tune in to Epic Voyages, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, Monday nights, right here on Inception Radio Network. To find out more about Epic and how you can become a member, visit epicvoyagers.com. That's EPICVOYAGERS.com.
Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming back to our show, Epic Voyages Radio. This is the last half hour tonight, and we're talking with Rob and Trish Macgregor about their book, Aliens in the Backyard. And we've been talking about abductions, but now we're getting ready to talk about planetary empaths, and we're going to go back for just a second and talk about some things about the Hopi prophecies. I want to remind you, if you want to call in and ask your own question, the dial-in number here is 888-919-2355, but you've only got about 25 minutes to do it. Also, you can go to Inception Radio Network and go to the chat room and type your question in there. So, backing up just a little bit to the Hopi culture, Prophecy Rock. I remember reading in your book that it's actually documented, carved on that rock on the Hopi land, about 3 world shakings. Rob and Trish, can you tell us a little bit more about that story and what that represents?
Right. Well, the 2 shakings are considered to be World War I, World War II, and the 3rd shaking is something that is yet to come. And so we had spent some time on the Hopi Reservation. We'd taken 3 trips out there, and part of it was for research for novels I was writing. The first one was called Prophecy Rock, and there with the same character is Will Lanza is through the 4 novels: Prophecy Rock, Hawk Moon, Double Heart, and Time Catcher, and it's really about the story of Pahana. And so if you're interested in the Hopis and these prophecies, and you'd like to have a little different spin on it with a fiction series of fiction novels, mysteries, and the first one, Prophecy Rock, actually won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for mystery writing.
And the links are at the top of that page I mentioned before. I just put it in the chat room again, the blog.synchrosecrets.com. The links are there for those books. I'm definitely going to check that out because I've been really interested in Native American, especially mysteries or history. I've read all kinds of books in the last 15 years or so since I came up here to New York, and I love that genre. I love it, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I'm going to check those out tomorrow. So we were talking about the planetary impasse, and I'm going to remind everybody that if they go to that same website, blog.synchrosecrets.com, there is a link to Planetary Impasse there at the top of the webpage, and that is where you actually have the running record of some of these comments from people that we've been talking about the last hour and a half. Reindeer Woman. You bring up Reindeer Woman in your book. I had never heard of Reindeer Woman before.
I had neither until this Deborah Fine wrote me and said that after the Indonesia quake, she had a dream that she was facing a goddess who was half human and half reindeer. And she was a mixture of skin, fur, and hair and had these enormous antlers, and she was really powerful. And she was flinging Diane's body around like a lasso, holding her by the hair. And then when the creature shifted the orbit of Diane's body slightly, she suddenly knew the creature was Reindeer Woman. Okay, at the time, she had no idea who Reindeer Woman was either. I mean, as far as she knew, there was no archetypal image of a reindeer woman. But she did correlate her body in the dream with the earth. And because she has this whole complicated mess of autoimmune diseases that she believes are directly linked to her abductions and to humanity's damage to the environment. So she believes that in the dream, her body was the earth, but still she was confused about who this powerful goddess was. Okay, skip ahead, February 24th, 2010. Diane and her husband are in this thrift store, and she sees this tattered novel on a shelf, and the cover featured a sketch of a rock with a pictograph of a woman that had antlers. She couldn't recall the title, but she handed the book to her husband and said, "The last time I saw Reindeer Woman, the Earth's axis shifted." And her husband, who's lived with her for all these years, knew what she was referring to, the Sumatra quake, and asked her if she wanted the book. And she said she didn't feel well. The store was really crowded. She needed to leave. 3 days later, the Chilean earthquake, 8.8, occurred. And once again, now she knows that when she has the Reindeer Woman dream, it means there's going to be some horrendous natural disaster. And the Chilean earthquake, according to NASA, actually moved the Earth's axis by about 8 centimeters and shortened the day by 1.26 microseconds.
I don't remember what the exact numbers are, but about a year ago I was looking at some material talking about how the axis of the Earth and true north have been moving,
towards
and
Russia.
Earthquakes like that only contribute considerably to that movement.
Right.
We got a really good question here from the chat room. Can you say a little bit more about the legend of the blue star from the Hopi culture?
Yeah, that is something that's in part of my novels. The blue star Kachina is an actual Kachina that has never been seen before. but supposedly in the legend is that when this blue star appears in the sky, this is the time of the great shaking and the end of the fourth world and the beginning of the fifth world. And that's when the blue star Kachina will dance in the plaza. And supposedly, or speculatively, the blue star is a craft.
Oh, a spacecraft.
Yes.
Oh, wow. I had not heard that before either. Is it somehow connected to the star Sirius?
I think it is. I think I remember reading that.
Okay,
It
so
makes sense.
your first book is Prophecy Rock. Now, do you talk about the blue star in all four of the books, or do you focus on it more in one than another?
It's in the first one and also the fourth one.
Okay. Okay, and I think it's very interesting that the name of one of your books is Double Heart, since we were talking about the statement that, and that was from the Lakota Sioux, that the reason that each of those ages ended is when men became two-hearted, which means infected with evil. So.
Right, and that's the theme in Double Heart.
Right. Well, that's very interesting that the blue star is dancing in the plaza, and it's related to a ship. Oh my, we're in for some interesting times.
I think we're in the middle of them.
Yeah, that's true. You mentioned the Pauli effect related to Wolfgang Pauli. Can you explain what that is?
Pauli was a quantum physicist, scientist, and anytime he walked into a laboratory, the equipment broke down. Now, here he is surrounded by other scientists who see this happen often enough, so they started referring to it as the Pauli effect. And it was, basically it's a telekinetic ability he had. And it apparently happened enough so that people used to joke about it. In fact, in one lab, he wasn't even allowed to come in because they were afraid that once he entered the room, everything would break down.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. When you think about it,
that's a terrible handicap to have if you work in a lab.
Yeah. And what's interesting is in 2012, we were asked to be on William Shatner's, what was it, Weird or What? I think the show is called. And what they do with the Weird or What show is they film each segment separately, so you don't really know what the full story is. And we flew to Toronto. Well, I should backtrack first. Pauli spent most of his life puzzling over the numbers 137, which is considered to be the DNA of light. And he never could find the right answer. And at the age of 58, when he had to go to the hospital for some routine surgery, and he saw that he was going to be in room 137, he told his friends, "I won't be leaving the hospital." And it was true. He died.
Wow.
So when we got to Toronto, we were supposed to talk about the Pauli effect. And we didn't know that the way they were structuring the show was they were using that maybe the Pauli effect had some facet of mind control to it, because this had to do with a woman who was having these strange experiences. And so one of their theories was maybe somebody's trying to control her mind. So we come into Toronto. The first thing we see is the limo we were in stops at a stoplight. I look out the window, and there on a storefront is the number 137.
Huh.
I thought,
it was very large.
Yeah, it was huge.
We were stuck in a traffic jam, and just right next to this huge 137, and it appeared 2 or 3 times during
repeatedly.
Yeah.
and it was, we were there to talk about Pauli, and that was his death number, So that was one synchronicity associated with that was just very strange. And we've had a number of other. Anyway, this number followed us throughout the 2 days in Toronto. It was just incredibly strange.
Wow.
That was my other cat knocking down a container of catnip.
Mine just left the window, and I'm hoping he doesn't come jump on the keyboard because he'll probably disconnect me. Going back to UFO sightings and relating them to other kinds of phenomena, you do mention towards the end of the book that there's several different theories or hypotheses to account, well, not to account for them, to explain them, not necessarily explain them away, but to sort of try and explain how they work. And some of these actually overlap with other paranormal things like ghosts and afterlife and things like that. And I just wanted to take a few minutes. We've got about, a little bit, 10 or 12 minutes left now in the show. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about each one of these and get your opinion about how you feel, the two of you, how these relate to what you've been, all the things you know about UFO sightings and the abductees. And the first one is visitors from our own future, time travel.
That's an interesting theory, and it's a possibility that we're being visited by ourselves in the future. One of the things that the Greys have said to people telepathically is that they have a right to do what they're doing, taking them. And that could be one explanation, but this would be a future that would be very far in the future. I would hope that if we end up evolving into these little gray beings, I mean, that seems like de-evolution to me.
But these gray beings also could be like robots.
Yeah.
Bio-robots.
Mm-hmm. A place for the awareness to reside that
Maybe.
Doesn't need to, that's a thought.
Uh-huh.
Not a very attractive choice, but...
No, and because they don't seem to have emotions.
Mm-hmm.
The way, at least from what people have described to us.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you were just describing about traveling through time is related to, I guess I could put these 2 points together, and multiverses or multiple dimensions and parallel or alternate universes and realities.
Well, I mean, doesn't it kind of go along with string theory?
Well, that was another one.
Right,
we put all three of them together.
The multiverse, that for every choice you make, the choice you didn't make is a shoot off and becomes its own reality.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then the last one is the afterlife. Maybe, and plus I've heard people say, well, ghosts are really not ghosts. They're coming from another dimension or another reality. So what do you think about the afterlife as an explanation?
Well, there's been experiences that people have had where they've been abducted in contact with alien beings, and they've also seen deceased relatives with them. And so the question is this a screen memory that the beings have put there, or are they in that same realm as the dead? Maybe they don't see the dead as the dead. Whitley Strieber thinks that's the case, that there is a definite connection with the dead and these beings, and that they move through that realm.
Very interesting. Couple of questions from the chat room. What will the fourth world bring? Thinking in terms of the Hopi nomenclature, what will that fourth world bring?
That's a
good question.
That's a good question. We could be living.
There's an analogy here. Some years ago, a writer and a researcher, Helen Wambach, did a session in Europe with a number of different groups of people, and she progressed them into the future. And they saw 3 different scenarios. One in which people lived in space, on, planets. Another where people lived in domes because the environment was so toxic. And then there was a third one that was like they lived in caverns or something. Huh. And so I don't know, every culture has its thing. Well, what's coming?
I remember what Trisha's talking about, and one of those was very technically advanced.
That's what it was.
But another was very psychically advanced, where people had superior intuitive abilities, and that they were very commonplace for precognition, telepathy, all the different aspects of psychic abilities were more developed.
Mm-hmm. That's been such a dilemma that's been going on since probably the beginning of our species. Is I've always thought of it as you've got two horses leading, harnessed together, and one is the logic and ration, and the other one is compassion and intuition. And you've got to let the two of them pull equally together, or you're going to ruin yourself. You can't go anywhere. It'll be a debacle. And yet that's something even today, that's something I think many people struggle with every day.
Yeah, I mean, if we can't live in a holistic sense, with left and right brain working together, then we probably are screwed.
Yeah, and that kind of explains what's going on around us, right?
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah. Here's another interesting question from the chat room, and I've never heard this particular hypothesis before. This is very interesting. Could one of the reasons that these ETs take people from the planet is to develop antibodies for themselves to be able to survive here?
Wow.
That's
certainly possible.
That's a possibility.
I've never heard that before.
No, I haven't either. But you have to wonder how they can exist in our atmosphere when they're from someplace totally different, if that's the case. And one of the theories is the Greys are actually wearing skins, and these large black eyes are not their actual eyes, but they're a protective lens that are over their eyes, and so they might actually look like something else underneath these protective skins they're wearing.
That makes sense. I mean, that makes a lot more sense than, well, that's just my opinion, but I was going to say it makes more sense than alien autopsies and finding out they've got green blood and that sort of thing.
Definitely.
Right.
At least to me it does. So
yeah. What I want to know, though, is really what all does the government know? Do they just have bits and pieces and they try and fit all these little pieces together? It's curious.
Now, have the two of you or either one of you separately have not written a book about that yet? Because if you haven't, I heartily suggest that you consider that.
Well, after Aliens in the Backyard came out and we went on Coast to Coast, no, I know what it was. It was when we first started publishing the Charles Fontaine series. It was a 9-part series about his abduction and encounter. Mm-hmm. We started getting hits from every acronym government agency, including the Canadian Royal Mounted Police, who stayed on the blog for like 8 hours.
Wow. Somebody had to be assigned. It wasn't just like a secretary messing around on the internet browsing. This was somebody who was assigned to look at this case that we had described in detail about the couple in Quebec who had this experience in their backyard.
I mean, we had Homeland Security, the FBI, the CIA. I guess government agencies have to show who they are in terms of Urals. So that's how we knew.
That is an interesting thing. It seems like if you come up with anything related to out of the ordinary, paranormal, extraordinary kinds of phenomena, people are watching you. I know someone who said that he's been followed, by a car. and I wouldn't. So far, he hasn't been threatened, but there's definitely a feeling the person's going to stay on his back bumper and follow him around, and that's just creepy.
That's on. Yeah, that's on. Ooh,
yeah,
gross.
We had an experience about 3 years ago where we had 3 of our computers were just totally destroyed. We were under attack. Our blog was taken over, and this person went on who took over the blog and wrote an apology to himself, supposedly from me, and it was just terrible. I mean,
it's an invasion.
It cost us thousands of dollars.
Yeah, it is an invasion. It's like being raped. I remember seeing that in your book, and that's just really ridiculous.
And inside of our computers, and they even went to the old Windows computer, the initial word that you have to put in, the keyword, I can't think of what it was called, to turn on the computer. He changed that, so I couldn't even turn on the computer.
Oh, nice. He did are you saying that he was physically, geographically where you were? Or he did this from a long distance?
No, we knew who he was. He was a computer guy.
Oh, and Lord.
He was a hacker, and he was a member of a skeptic society, and he got ticked off about the stuff we were writing about.
Wow. So be forewarned, if you're going to be on the bleeding edge, on the cutting edge, it's the bleeding edge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Rob and Trish, we're just about out of time. I'm going to make some announcements again to talk about the book that we've got coming out, but I'd like to know, are you working on a book right now, either one of you?
Yeah, I am. I'm working on I've got an astrology book coming out in September called Unlocking the Secrets to Scorpio.
Ooh.
Yes.
Ooh.
And it's like an everything Scorpio book.
Now, why did you pick that for the topic?
Well, that was what the publisher picked, and the guy who owns the company is a Scorpio, so I guess he wanted to know and he's married to a Scorpio and has 2 Scorpio children.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting household. I'm a Scorpio, and I can tell you stories. So I'll be looking for that book. Definitely be looking for that book.
And I'm working on a novel right now that involves multiple dimensions, our normal everyday world and a dream world, and how the two merge together. It's called Dominion.
Say a little bit more about that. Say that again with other words.
It's difficult to describe because what's happening in this, it relates to a phenomenon called tulpas. Tulpas are creatures that supposedly have been created through deep meditation by meditating monks in Tibet. And there was a book written in the 1930s about a researcher and explorer who got into Lhasa and stayed in a monastery and was actually trained and was able to create a tulpa herself. And what happened is that they had to find a way to destroy this tulpa because it became independent and was out of control. And so I took that was the nugget of the idea that I had, that these tulpas basically were banished into this dream world, but they learned to reproduce themselves in the same way that the monks had produced them. And then the concept is that they want to take over the dream world, and as they do this, what they're doing is trying to create the dream world becomes the real world. So I have 2 characters that are in our everyday world and 2 characters that are in the dream world, and the 2 eventually merge, and the tulpas are taking over and are the whole idea is that they have to somehow take the world back from the tulpas.
Wow. Okay, so that's 2 books that just went to the top of my list that I've got to have. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and I can't tell you how fascinating it is talking to the two of you.
Thanks
and
for having us. We love talking
I'm sure
too.
we're going to do it again. Let me remind everybody real quickly. Let's see. Carol Carl is going to be talking with Linda Godfrey next week about the Beast of Bray Road. And the week after that, I'm going to be interviewing Ken Cherry about his new book about the Stephenville UFOs. So please come back and join us. Make a date for yourself Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time here at Inception Radio Network for the Epic Voyages radio show. And thanks to Joe, our producer, who works very hard keeping me on track. And everybody have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.